Okay, let's understand what is one tier architecture or standalone environment. So I'm going to write standalone environment. So to understand this, first let me draw a architecture of this. So how it will look like. So what will happen in the standalone environment? So your presentation layer, I call it as PL. Okay. So PL stands for what? Presentation layer. And your business logic layer, that is BL, and your database layer will reside in the same tier. That means, okay, so what will happen is all the three, presentation layer and your business logic layer and your database layer, all of them will reside in the same tier, where your client and your server also resides in the same place. So that is where your standalone environment, which is specific to that particular system. So what will happen? Let's take an example of your MS Office. So let's say if I have to open Word document, I will go and open the MS Office Word document. That means my presentation layer is here. I can able to do certain operation, and there is no database required for this. Whatever the operations, I can try to go and save this document wherever I want. So this is what I can do as part of this application. Let's take another example of a desktop application, which is my calculator application. So I will open this application, and this is my presentation layer, and business logic is what I am trying to do the multiplication, and then I'm getting the output. So presentation layer is there, business logic layer is there, and also this is like temporary calculations. There is no such database here, but you will have the everything in the same tier. That kind of applications we call it as one tier architecture or standalone environment. So there is one more called MS Access database. So you can make use of MS Access also as a one tier architecture, where everything will reside in the same system. So in simple words, if you wanted to understand the standalone environment, what is going to happen? Whatever the application you wanted to have, if at all you're trying to make use of the system within the system itself, within that application itself, for example, you install the software and you are going to make use of it within the same system, that kind of application will comes as part of standalone application. So now, to avoid that kind of problems, that means you cannot access outside of the system, your client server will comes into picture. It has two tier architecture, right? So what does it mean? Your presentation layer, what will happen is your presentation layer will be and in the first tier, and also your business logic layer also will reside in the first tier. Presentation layer and business logic layer will be here, and the database layer will reside in the next tier, and your client will be here. Okay, so your client will reside in the first tier. That means client will be performing the operation here, and then the server acts as your database layer here. That means whenever the user performs at an operation from the presentation layer based upon the business logic, it will go and talk to the database layer and give the information back to the presentation layer. That is what will happen in the desktop, the client server applications. So simple example is your intranet applications. What do you mean by intranet applications? So take an example of a apartment building. Let's say you have an apartment building, and you will have every building has a intercom phones, right? So when you, what do you mean by intercom phones? So those phones are, okay, those phones will be uh, it will not, you will not be able to make calls outside, but there is a connectivity between these phones to the security person. For example, assume these are all the flats available in an apartment, and there is a security guy. Assume this is your security place. So once somebody comes into this security gate, what is happening? So through this person, he is going to call this particular flat if at all he wanted to allow, or else this person, or else whoever it may be. So what is happening? So these all people have a connectivity internally where those phones don't use any internet connections, and there will be a common network. So the common network will have connectivity with all of these people, and it will connect all of these systems, which is intranet. What do you mean by intranet? Intranet means within the system itself it will work. It will, you will not be able to dial from the intranet intercom phones to outside. So that is what your client server mechanism. So what is that? The other example you can see is, say for example, you might see some of the grocery shops or supermarkets, they use some internal applications, right? So let us say uh, in any organization also, certain things they will do it with intranet. So they will have a common server here. So this is their server, and then they will have different workstations, and they will have intra connectivity. Intra connectivity means it will work only within their systems, within their network. So that kind of applications we call it as client server applications. And since we are not able to access these from the internet, there the three-tier architecture has coming to picture. So that means your three-tier architecture where you will be having three tiers. One is presentation layer, another one is business logic layer, and the last one is your database layer. So the first one where your client resides in the presentation layer, the client will reside in the first tier, and then your business logic layer or application server we call it as, and your database layer also will be there, and then your server will reside in the last tier. So what will happen? To do this kind of activity, you need to have a web server. So for internet applications, you need to have web server. Okay, so web server examples are Tomcat. Okay, so you might heard of it. If at all you don't hear anything also, that's fine. So one of the example is Tomcat server. Okay, now what will happen? From the presentation layer, if the user performs any operation based upon the business logic, it will go to the web server, and through the web server, it will go to the database layer and fetch the information back through the web server and present it in the presentation layer. What does it mean? Let us take an example of if you take your website, let's say this website, you take Google website or the bus website, whatever you have taken, right? So for example, if I go back one more time, what will happen is you are going to enter the city, and you are going to enter the from city to city and the date, and then you click on search. So what is happening? The client is making a request. What is that you're doing? You are making a request. What parameters you have passed? When I say parameters, from and to, and then you are going to give some date also. These are called input parameters for the request. So whatever we have requested, according to the request, you got one response from the server based on the database results. So if you understand these terminologies, then we should be able to understand the API testing easily. So there are two terms I have used. One is I have used the request, right? I made a request. According to my request, there is a response which has come back, and I'm able to see the same thing on my presentation layer. So that is what your three-tier architecture does. So where now you understood what is the meaning of a client, right? So client means what? Wherever the user is trying to perform certain operation, that we call it as your client presentation layer. Client is nothing but your customer, the user. Where he can operate it from? He can operate it from any desktop, you can operate it from a desktop, or you can operate it from a laptop, or you can operate it from mobile phone also. So whatever the application you are trying to access from these particular devices, so that place we call it as client. And whatever the response you are getting, so there your server will get the response through the web server. That means your server will provide you the information based upon the database to the presentation layer. Let us say how it is going to happen. And simple example, let's say this is our website, let's say rkithub.in. Okay, so if you look at here, you are able to see the presentation layer. So now what I wanted to do, I wanted to go to the registration page and I wanted to click on student button. So once I click on student button, see rkithub.in student registration.html. That means it is navigated to this particular page. That means based upon my request, it went to that particular page and it pulled the information. Where this information is available in the server. What do you mean by server? So that server is my hosting space. You have to understand this terminology also. Your server, whatever the place you have hosted your website on a particular domain. Okay, what is my domain? If you look at my domain here, rkithub.in is my domain. Okay, rkithub.in is my domain. There I have hosted my all these pages I have hosted from that particular server. You are able to get this information where I hosted this. That means you will have certain platforms. You might have heard of GoDaddy, right? GoDaddy. So there are GoDaddy. This is a space where people will purchase the space, and the server space they will purchase, and then they will log in and they will keep all the files which are related to this particular website in that particular place. Then automatically your application will be available through internet. That is where your rkithub.in is able to access for everybody, right? So you are able to access this website because it is hosted on a particular site.